Hey, I'm Shade Tree Pastor, and it's time for another 5 Minutes in the Bible. Today, I'm going to be answering another question that came from one of you. Someone in my live stream this past Sunday made a really good comment, but they made it right at the end, and I wasn't able to respond to it. So I thought I would today. The topic of the talk we had last Sunday was about whether or not we should tithe and give regularly to modern day churches. And I presented an argument that there is really not much of anything in Scripture that would set up that kind of system of regular giving to the church. On the one hand, all the Old Testament things about tithing are really about the temple and the sacrificial system, neither of which exist anymore. And almost everything the New Testament says about giving is about collections for the poor and needy, with the one kind of possible exception of the Apostle Paul talking about being able to take care of and support what we might today call professional church workers. So as we were having that conversation, someone commented in the live chat that they still believe church is necessary. And I thought that would be a great thing to discuss in this week's 5 Minutes in the Bible. And we're going to do it by taking a look at a verse that kind of talks about that. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. Before we get to that, I want to say our answer to that question does depend a little bit on how we define church. There are actually 3 different ways we can define church, or the way we use that word church today in English. One is the way the Scripture uses the term, generally referred to as ecclesia in the Greek, to mean the body of all believers. And in that sense, there is no necessary or unnecessary. It simply exists. Believers in Jesus exist, so the church, the ecclesia, exists. But there's 2 other ways we use that. One is to refer to the gathering together of people. Like in the vernacular, we might say, what are you doing this Sunday? The family and I are going to go to church. And then when we get home from church, we're going to do this, that. We are not usually just referring to the place, but we are referring to the gathering. What we are going to find is that gathering is what Hebrews chapter 10 speaks about, and that is something we should continue. Of course, the third way is to refer to the place itself, the campus or building or worship center or church, whatever you want to call it. And in that sense, I think we're going to find it is absolutely not necessary. So let's take a look at what Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25 have to say. Here we begin in verse 24. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. A couple things we can quickly note about this. First of all, the context is encouragement. The reason for gathering together is encouragement. While I do believe that the Scripture, the Bible, teaches us to worship God, that we should spend time in worship with God, this particular verse does not seem to be directly about that. It is literally about encouraging one another. The other thing we note is that indeed there were some people that were finding gathering together not really that necessary and perhaps not really that beneficial, enough that they were not in the habit of doing it. And then the final thing we can see here is that there is no real description of this gathering given other than to encourage one another. There's nothing said about the frequency of it. There is nothing said about what we are to do when we are there, or what it is to look like, or even where we are to gather together. So I find a lot of freedom there for us. I think the one thing we can be sure of is that we are meant to gather together, at least at times, for the purpose of encouragement. But what that gathering looks like is really open to interpretation. Does it even have to be in person? Could it be fulfilled by something today like an online gathering, like the live streams we do here every Sunday at 10 a.m. on YouTube? Does it have to be at a building? Does it have to have music and liturgical aspects and preaching the way we commonly think of it today? Now, those are questions that are a little beyond the scope of this quick 5-minute look. But I will say that I don't think we can be overly specific about what that gathering is supposed to look like. And certainly, I think we can say that church, in the sense of a building, a place with all of its overhead and its full-time staff and all of the things like that, are absolutely not necessary or required by Scripture. But continuing to meet together in order to encourage one another is. So perhaps we can figure out better ways to do that.